as well. Now, last night we got the chance to see a team that has been very much a part of the college football national championship picture with championships in, 16 and 18, Clemson. Last year's team won 10-plus games again, and yet it seemed like it was like, man, what's wrong with Clemson? Because the offense struggled. It struggled last night, but eventually just wore down Georgia Tech. Jeff Collins, a guy that's on your hot seat. Craig, I don't know how much you watched the game as well, but that game was kind of like up in the air for a little bit at 14-10, and next thing you know, pop, the game was over.
I mean, yeah, it was close. I never really felt, even with Georgia Tech within a score, that they were going to, stay that way throughout the course of the contest. I still feel like Jeff Collins is somebody, I think you said Jeff Scott. Jeff Scott's at USF, but Jeff Collins is somebody who I still think is very much on a hot seat. I think that he made some decisions or not made decisions last night that certainly show why some people are just pulling their hair out on how he navigates the course of a game. But also, to his credit, they showed a bit of fight and some spunk and, made a few plays. And, yeah, they kept it interesting, at least for a little while. I don't know how much was them, forcing that and how much of that was just Clemson kind of finding its way as well, because the first part of that game did very much feel like the first football game of the season, which is, what's to be expected. DJU didn't look fantastic. He didn't look like he's about to, claim the Heisman Trophy, but there were some things to like. He was very efficient. If you look purely at the numbers, I mean, he didn't have a bad game by any margin. There's certainly some areas of improvement that are still needed and some bugaboos that Clemson fans have that are still there, that did not, disappear during the course of the offseason. So, that's just kind of, there's going to be some things that come with his game. It's not going to be perfect, but, I understand the excitement about Klubnik, but that was late in the game. And, I'm not going too much off of that, but I do think that you see the talent level there and you go, okay, well, DJU's good, but, if this guy's better and, gives us a better chance, I'm curious to see how that conversation kind of progresses. But, yeah, I mean, Clemson looked good, great defense, skill players are good. I just think, it kind of revolves around the quarterback spot and how good is DJU going to be throughout the course of the year. But, on the downside of things for Clemson, just the ones that at least come to top of mind is there is a little bit of that magic missing. I don't think there's any question about that. You have the coaching changeover, you have the in-house hire. There's a lot of controversy about that, a lot of discussion about that over the offseason. And I do think that's something that even with the win last night, you look at that game and you go, okay, in the end, if you didn't know, you weren't watching, you're like 41-10, they kicked it, they smoked them. And yeah, they did technically, but it took a little while to get to that point to where you were like, okay, now it's a blowout. And I think there are some questions right now. I'm not going so far as like Dabo's lost his touch or Dabo's lost his coordinators and he doesn't have a Venables or a Tony Elliott anymore. So he doesn't like he's lost his magic. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that they're just in a program that has been so freaking successful that 10 wins last year is a down year, like you said, and they're in the midst of some change right now. So, we'll see how they navigate that change, but I see the reason for concern. I also see the reason for optimism, so I'm going to sit back and just let it play out.
It makes you realize what Nick Saban deals with almost annually with his coordinators and others moving on, and he's about to face one, of course, with Steve Sarkisian Saturday in Austin.
And Dabo's been lucky that he had this big, long run of them. Most coaches don't.
The continuity was fantastic.
Look at Kirby Smart, lost Dan Lanning, won national title, lost Dan Lanning. I mean, that's what's going to happen. And so Clemson was able to keep both Venables and Tony Elliott for several years after they won titles. That offensive line is still not up to
127 yards. They average 3.2 yards per carry.
Yeah, it's still not up to what Clemson needs to be to if they want to beat the teams that are ahead of them right now. That offensive line has to be a whole lot better. It really does. Bottom line.
Well, they don't have to beat any of them yet.
Yeah, but I mean that's what their goal is. Their goal is to win the ACC, which they didn't do last year, and to be in the college football playoff, which they weren't last year. That's where Clemson's stature is right now. DJU to me, I think there's an it factor with Cade Klubnik that I think will eventually probably snap up and change things, especially if Clemson loses to, say, NC State or someone like that down the line, and it's because of the offense that would make them make the change. But Dabo's pretty loyal, but he's played a true freshman in twice before in Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. So if Cade Klubnik is the guy, then he is the guy. Here's an interesting note. So my my top 5 coaches on the hot seat yesterday, volume 1. 2 guys named Jeff, 2 guys named Scott, and 1 guy who's both.
Oh my goodness!
And that guy might be the hottest of them all when all is said and done. But
Collins made some decisions last night. Timeouts. Like one of them was like a 3rd and 2 coming up, and then he didn't even have all of his timeouts left, and he just called timeout, and Clemson picked up the first down. There was some very strange at the end of the first half.
His
he had
game management was very, very bad.
Yeah,
I mean, it was okay. It was bad enough early on that people wondered aloud on Twitter, and granted, it's Twitter, if he's throwing the game, if he is interested in just not being the coach at Georgia Tech anymore. And I know that's like just the typical hyperbole and all that you get, but there were times when you're like, is this somebody that is trying to keep this job or somebody who is interested in going and just having a fat buyout of some sort? I don't know his contract stipulations, but then, and then they made some plays and they kept it close and, but a couple blocked punts. That's obviously not going to get it done, but that's, great for the Tigers. I just think that Clemson's in kind of a, it's the first week. That's kind of how I feel. Like, I don't want to get too crazy over any results this weekend. We can all be like ration our judgment and go like hot takey and all of that. I just thought they looked like a good, better than most football team with a really talented quarterback who's not perfect by any means, and he could be imperfect enough that it allows another very talented quarterback to force himself into the situation. That's something they're no doubt going to have to navigate this year unless DJU just plays, flawlessly over the next few months, which he's not going to do.
Wake Forest and NC State just coming around the corner.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to see a lot here coming up soon. So, yeah, I mean, it's one game. Georgia Tech was never a game that I really was in fear for them in week 1. So it turned out kind of how I expected. It's just maybe a little bit rougher around the edges than you would think. But again, it's week 1. So I think everybody's going to have a little rough around the edges.
He didn't have a lot of time. The offensive line,
that's an issue, yeah.
They did not have a lot of time, and I think there was a little bit of that in him. And I saw a couple of NFL scouts, not NFL scouts, but guys who are former scouts or those who look at that saying that he really is like hyperventilating a little bit with the pressure. Until you get in that position, one thing I thought is that Klubnik looks like he's better runner.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's like smoother, faster, leaner.
The one negative I saw, and it wasn't even a negative. I wish I could remember who brought it up because I'm not a quarterback guru by any means. I just am as big a fan as anybody else. But they talk about his windups a bit long. But outside of that, I think that there's not a whole lot to not be happy with.
Well, and look, they play Wake Forest here in a couple weeks, and and Wake Forest is getting Sam Hartman back.
Yep.
Huge news.
So
there was a thought that was going to be a long-term type. He's out.
He had blood clots, which
Tom
Frazier had blood clots,
and was out a long time.
Yeah, you don't really. It's not something you're like, oh, I have a blood clot. Can you take care of that so I can go to my meeting this afternoon at 1? Like, you can't. You don't know. I mean, there's a lot of things to do it. So glad to see that Sam Hartman is going to play.
Yeah,
and that does tilt the balance of power at least a little bit away from Clemson more in the ACC because Sam Hartman's the greatest quarterback in the history of Wake Forest, and they had the best offensive season they've ever had with him last year. And him coming back and only missing what could be 1 or 2 games. He might even be able to play Saturday against Vanderbilt. They don't know yet, but if he can play Saturday against Vanderbilt, he misses 1 game. There's a lot of panic.
Yeah. Did we discover a secret blood clot drug in the past couple of weeks? Because that went
Frazier was out extended amount of time.
Hey, if we did, great. I mean, I'm glad. I don't want to see anybody sidelined by that. That's a scary thing to deal with, is blood clots. So yeah,
21 years old.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, whatever happened to navigate that to where now he's in a position to play by potentially week 2. That's incredible news, and I look forward to hearing more about I'm sure there will be some 70-page article somewhere in The Athletic or something about, his return once everything settles. But, yeah, that's huge. I mean, that's big news for the ACC as well. I think the ACC is, you look at it, it's pretty wide open. I mean, Clemson's probably still your favorite, but they don't look unbeatable by any stretch of the imagination. Florida State got a really nice win, but I think we all watched that game. We realized those weren't 2 very good teams at all. Miami still remains to be seen. How good are they really with Mario Cristobal in year 1? North Carolina, shaky but capable, on any given week. Wake Forest now with the Hartman news. Louisville's obviously playing with some fire already. So, yeah, it's it's just week one, but there's already a lot of storylines emerging and some that are just confirmation of what we already kind of knew. But that Hartman news and now just getting to see Clemson and kind of seeing where they really are, it sets the table nicely to kind of move on from here.
We will have Jeff Howe covers Texas for that Texas-Alabama game coming up 11 o'clock on Fox on Saturday. I'll tell you who I was impressed with last night, even though they got blown out in the end. Jeff Sims, the quarterback of Georgia Tech. He wasn't spectacular with his stats. That is one tough-as-nails young man. And I was surprised. I looked him up. You think he looks 6'4"?
No.
That's what it says on his.
I think he does. Just looks like a lean 6'4".
Tough.
Yeah.
No great stats. Nothing 164 yards passing, 41 yards. But, I mean, he took a beating. And here's what else I noticed, and anyone let me know. When you saw not all 22 players on the field the way the camera angles are, but when you saw most of them in the same screen, did it not look like every single player in a Clemson uniform was bigger and more alpha than most everybody wearing a Georgia Tech uniform? And that's not surprising, but I mean across the board, they were just better.
Yeah, and that shouldn't be because, Georgia Tech for the better part of the last decade hasn't been very good, and they don't really have their identity. And I don't know what – it's surprisingly become very tough to win there. And I know that, look, it's a really great academic school, Georgia Tech is. You can't just walk in with a 900 SAT score and hope to be a student athlete at Georgia Tech. So it's not that you can really anywhere, but it's not. They're not going to lower their standards. They're not Stanford, but they're not far off.
And they are not a diploma mill. Like you don't. I mean, they are a very hard school to get into. They are not. I don't know the exact rankings, but they are Stanford-ish in that way. Yeah.
So again, like Stanford, like Notre Dame, they're a program that you have to recruit specific guys to because you can't, bend too far away from where your standards are. And, they've had great runs in the past where they're really good. But look, they were when I was at Florida State early, they were probably the chief competition early on. They were the scariest team.
They won a national championship in 1990, and then Paul Johnston's teams were really, really good.
Yeah.
All right, why do you have to bring me and my SAT into this thing?
I'm with you, though. Georgia Tech needs to figure something out. I mean, I think, for one thing that definitely hurts them is their best player is now playing for Alabama and potentially a Heisman Trophy contender in Jahmyr Gibbs. So that didn't help matters last night. But, yeah, I do agree with the identity piece of it. I think Jeff Collins is such a warm-seated coach at the moment who, like I said earlier on in that game, I'm like, does he even want to try to win this game or is he intentionally trying to sabotage this thing? So I think that's probably where Georgia Tech fans are right now is like, okay, every once in a while there's something to like, then every once in a while there's something to not like, and we don't really know where to fall in between things, and we're not even getting the vibes from him necessarily that this is like the long play for him. So I think everyone's trying to sort out what the best is in the immediate future for Georgia Tech, and right now it's Jeff Collins, but that's also not a school that's going to go pull the USC hiring Lincoln Riley move or, things like that. It's much different circumstances for them because of some of the reasons you mentioned. So, yeah, good effort, but very curious to see how the rest of the season goes for the Yellow Jackets.
Now, here's something that